Hungarian Folk Tales. The Magic Lock. Once upon a time, long ago and far away, there lived a poor woman and she had one son. One day she had to do the washing for someone, and when she got home, she found the place empty. Where could her son have gone? Where could he be? No one could tell her. If only she had known that devils had taken him away. They had carried him off to hell to set him to work for them. When the boy had spent 7 years with them, they assigned him 7 rooms. He had to do everything: sweep them, clean them, dust them up, anything and everything he had to do. Now in the 7th room there was a lock, a magic lock, and in that lock lived 12 devils. He worked and worked on that lock until he eventually stole it. He escaped from those devils and went straight off home to his mother. Now what did he say to his mother? He said, "Mother, go to the king and ask him for his daughter's hand, for I would like to take her as my wife." Off went his mother to the king and asked for his daughter as a bride for her son. The king roared with laughter at the idea of such a lad wanting his daughter in marriage, so he said, "Listen, my dear, I'll give my daughter to your son if during the night he can root up and destroy the forest that surrounds the village. Make it disappear without a trace. That's the only way my daughter will ever be his bride." So the poor woman went home and told her son what the king had said. Well, all the son had to say was, "If that's all that's needed, that's how it will be." When evening fell, he turned the key in the lock, and right away there were 12 devils in front of him. "Off you go, level that forest by morning, so roots and all have gone and nothing remains, not even a fallen acorn." And the devils set to work. Next morning there wasn't a sign or trace of the forest, even the roots had all been pulled up. The lad went to the king to report the task was done, and he had come to claim his daughter. "You can have her if by morning there stands in the forest place a fine field of green corn." Now that was no bother to the lad at all. He had his magic lock which helped him to do it all, and by the morning in place of the forest there was a fine field of bright green corn. Again the lad went to the king and said, "Your Majesty, I have done what you asked." The king looked out and saw the fine corn, but all he said was, "Well indeed, you've done all your tasks. I'll give you one more. By morning lay out a road in front of my palace that is paved with diamonds, with trees at its sides and the trees full of birds. If you succeed in this task, then my daughter shall be yours." The lad went home and in the evening turned the key in the lock, and in the morning in front of the king's palace sparkled a diamond road with flowering trees and the trees full of birds. The king looked out and was almost blinded by the glittering brightness and the beauty of the trees. He couldn't believe his eyes. For that, it was worth giving his daughter's hand. And so it passed. On the following morning, there above the meadow hung a palace from a golden chain, and beautiful it was too. And that is where they lived. One day he went hunting, but he didn't take the lock with him and left it with his wife. She didn't know the value of the rusty old lock because her husband hadn't told her. Now the devils had a companion, and she was an ugly old witch. She happened to come by the palace, crying, "New locks for old, new locks for old." The king's daughter heard her and was delighted, so she called out that she had one. Now that's just what the old witch wanted. Out she took from her pocket a new lock and exchanged it for the magic lock. Now the palace hanging from the golden chain immediately turned into a tumble-down old shack. The princess cried and cried, but she couldn't imagine how it had happened. When her husband came back, he almost fell over when he saw the tumble-down shack standing where his fine palace should be. His wife wept and told him how she had exchanged the lock for a new one from the old woman. Her husband was consumed by sorrow when he heard this. But he pulled himself together, went to the king and told him the full and short of it. Off you go to Mother Moon, who is all of 100 years old, and perhaps she will put things right. Off the lad went to see Mother Moon, who was all of 100 years old. But Mother Moon couldn't do anything about it. She just gave him a dog and sent him to Mother Sun, who was all of 200 years old. Off he went to her, but she just gave him a mouse and sent him on to Mother Wind, who was all of 300 years old. He told her why he had come, and she gave him a cat, and told him that there on an island in the middle of the deep blue sea lived an old witch, and it was she who had the lock. Wasn't he the happiest man there was? He did what he was told and went off to where Mother Wind told him to go. His way to the island wasn't easy, what with the mouse and the cat and the dog, but once they were there, it took the three animals no time at all to bring him the lock. When they got home, the young husband of the king's daughter turned the key in the lock, and straight away the palace was hanging there in its old place from a golden chain. The young pair were so happy, and they lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Round Stone. Once upon a time, there lived a poor man. He had many, many children. Off he would go to catch a fish for the table, for they were very poor and had to eat. His wife would cook these fish for all the children. That's what they had to live on. Now, not far away from there lived his brother and his family, and very rich he was too. But he never helped his brother out. When there wasn't a bite to eat in the poor man's house, he would send to his brother, in the name of God, to let him have enough flour to make supper for the children. But he never got any. Once, when there was hardly a scrap to eat for a whole week, the poor fisherman said to his wife he was off to fish and he wouldn't come back until his satchel was full. He sat down on the bank early in the morning. No matter where he cast his net, there was nothing in it when he drew it in, not even a fish as big as my little finger. Now dusk was on him and still no fish. The poor man grew very angry. Well then, he thought, that's it. I'll cast the net one more time, and no matter what, I'll go home. When he pulled it out, well, it was as heavy as could be. Now then, said he to himself, there must be a huge fish in it. Indeed, he could hardly pull the net out of the water. Out it came, and what was in it but a great, big, round stone. Ah, well, said he, I'll take it home anyway. At least the children at home will be able to play with it. And home he took it. His children were still awake. They looked at the great big round stone and started to play with it. They couldn't go to bed. They were having such fun with the game. They rolled it up and rolled it down the room and screamed with delight because the stone was getting brighter and brighter. Look, wife dear, this is some kind of wonder of a stone. It's shining like a diamond. Dear heart, said she, it's a diamond for sure. So they quickly decided that she should go next day to show the stone to the king himself, to see if he wanted to buy it for a lot of money. Up she rose at the dawning of day, wrapped the stone in a kerchief, and set off to see the king. First she saluted the king in the proper way. She took out the stone and showed it to him. Now, where did you find that, my poor good woman? Said the king, and was astonished. She told him that her husband had found it in the water. Then, my poor good woman, let me have it, and I'll give you 1,000 florins for it. Because he knew that it was a real diamond. The poor woman did not say a word. She just gave a little cough. Well, if 1,000 isn't enough, I'll give you 2,000. And the poor woman coughed again and was so confused that not a word could she speak. But the king thought she wanted more. Listen then, my poor good woman. Would you think 3 sacks of gold would be enough for the stone? This time she didn't cough. She just nodded her head. Straight away the king filled 3 sacks with gold and even gave her a cart and a horse so that she could go home. Well, didn't she go home in great happiness? Or wasn't there great happiness at home too? Never again would they go hungry. Well then, dear wife, said the poor fisherman, we should weigh the gold to see how much we have. Right you are, said she. Now there wasn't a weight in the house. One of the boys went to see the rich uncle. What would you be wanting a weight for? Asked the rich relation mockingly. My father wants to weigh some money, said the boy. Well, the rich relative had a great laugh at this. Here you are, son. Here's the weight. And I'll come too, for this is something I have to see. Your father weighing money. So the rich relation stood, and all he could do was open his mouth and his eyes wide in amazement. Not even he had ever seen as much money all at once. Where did you get all that gold from? The fisherman thought to himself, I'll have a little joke here. The king gave it to me in return for 3 cats. How could that be? Asked the rich relation. Well, the fact is, brother, the king's palace is knee-deep in mice. So many that the king and the royal family cannot even eat their lunch or their supper. I heard of this, and while I was coming and going, I got 3 cats and brought them with me as a present for the king. It was as if I'd been given a reprieve, so delighted was the king, and he straight away gave me 3 sacks of gold for the 3 cats. The rich relation heard this and couldn't wait to get started. Well, up he went and called everywhere in the villages around them, and he bought every cat there was for a right handful of money. He packed them all into his cart and off he went to the king. What have you come here for? Asked the king. Your Majesty, I heard that you were in great need of cats, so that's what I've brought you. You mean in that sack there's nothing but cats? Let me see. The rich relation opened the sack. There were cats jumping all over the place. Cats to the right, cats to the left, cats everywhere. And you know what cats are like? They ripped and tore at everything. Dear heavens, what is going on here? Many cats, that's what. The king had him seized for playing such a trick on him. He threw him into prison, and for all I know, he's still in there, if he hasn't been set free, for catting the king. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Slipper-Tearing Princesses. Once upon a time, there lived a king who had 3 daughters. Each of them wore and tore 12 pairs of slippers every single night. Finally, the king could not supply them any longer with footwear, so he issued a declaration across the land. He declared that anyone who could tell him where his daughters wore out their slippers every night would receive a very attractive payment as reward. The king had a young lad who worked as a shepherd. As he was grazing his flock of sheep one day, he suddenly decided to visit the royal palace. When he arrived, he told the king his reasons for coming. Your Majesty, I shall find out where your daughters go every night. All right, go ahead, and if you are successful, you'll get a rich reward. The king sent the shepherd boy to sleep in the same room where his daughters slept. The lad lay down on the floor with his bag and stick and pretended to be asleep. It was around midnight when he saw an old witch fly in through the window. She produced some kind of cream or ointment which the princesses rubbed on their knees and arms. As soon as they were done, they all hopped on a broom, took all their slippers and flew out of the window. The shepherd boy watched carefully, and finally he rubbed the ointment on himself and his stick. As soon as he was done, he whooshed right after the princesses, never letting them out of his sight. It wasn't long before the girls reached a silver forest, where they all settled down to rest. In the middle of the forest there was a silver well, with 3 silver goblets standing right next to it. The 3 princesses each had a sip of water. When they were finished, the shepherd boy collected their silver goblets and put them in his bag. He even broke off a silver twig from one of the trees. The twig rang out loud when he snapped it from the branch. The small princess was very frightened. "Why are you so scared, silly? Nobody can follow us here." So after a while, they all got on their broomsticks and flew off. They finally reached the middle of the golden forest. There was a well made of gold with 3 golden goblets standing right next to it. Each girl took a sip of water. The lad even broke a golden twig from one of the trees. The twig rang out loud when it snapped from the branch. The smallest prince was very frightened. "Don't be such a coward. There's nobody here. Who could it be anyway?" They flew off, but the shepherd was still following them. They soon arrived at the diamond forest, where there was a well made of diamonds with diamond goblets on the side. When the princesses all had their fill, the shepherd collected the goblets, broke a diamond twig, the twig rang out loud, and the smallest princess was very frightened. "Stop being scared all the time. There's nobody following us." They got on their brooms and continued their flight. Suddenly a huge gate opened up before them from somewhere below the ground. Inside there were 12 young he-devils waiting for them, and there was music playing from the attic. The shepherd boy quickly hid beneath the table, and he kept a close watch on everything. The he-devils and the girls started to dance. As the shepherd was watching a bit more closely, he noticed that the floor of the room was covered in razor blades. It was no wonder that the slippers of the princesses were worn and torn, since they were all dancing on the razor's edges. When one was torn to shreds, they just threw it away and put on a new one. When the 12 pairs of shoes were all danced to shreds, they sat down at the table. They all had a golden spoon and a fork to eat with. When one of them dropped her golden spoon, the shepherd boy quickly picked it up and put it into his bag. The other princess dropped her golden fork, and the shepherd boy picked it up and put it into his bag as well. When the girls were finally satisfied, they all hurried back home. But this time the shepherd boy flew faster because he wanted to get home first. By the time the princesses reached the royal palace, the shepherd boy was finally laying in front of their beds, pretending to be fast asleep. "He never even moved," the girls said. "Look, he's fast asleep." Morning came, and the shepherd went to see the king. The king asked him, "Well, son, have you seen anything? Have you found out anything?" "I have, your majesty. I have seen things, and I have found out things." At that point in time, the king summoned his 3 daughters, and the shepherd started to speak. First, they went to a silver forest, and here is the evidence. He produced the silver goblets and the silver twig. Then they flew on to the golden forest, where they drank from their golden goblets. With that, he pulled the golden goblets and the golden twig from his bag. From there, they flew on to the diamond forest, where they drank another cup. Finally, they stopped in a palace where they danced with devils, and that's how they wore and tore all their slippers. In the meantime, they ate and drank too. One of them dropped her spoon, the other her fork. And here is the evidence, your majesty. "Well done, son." The king ordered that the 2 elder daughters be locked up in the tower each night, gave his blessings to the youngest one, who married the shepherd boy. And that is how the slipper tearing came to an end. Hungarian Folk Tales. Susu. In the village, there lived a wealthy farmer. He had barns and cellars and attics that were full of goods, plus he also had a couple of 100 florins sewn into a sack. However, he also had a lazy, good-for-nothing, stupid wife who was truly useless. Each time the farmer was about to leave for work, he told Susu what to do. Go to the neighbour lady, see what she is doing, and do exactly as she does. So Susu walked over to the neighbour's house, where they were busy bleaching the linen. When she saw this, she went home, took her husband's boots and leather hat into the bleach and let them cook there. They must have been in there for a long time, because when she took them out and she was about to take them to the stream for rinsing, they melted away in her hands. When her husband came home, he asked her, "Well, Susu, what have you been doing all day?" She told him what she had done, and the poor man had to give her a beating. Finally, he told her to pay more attention to the neighbour woman the next time. The next day, the neighbour woman was preparing mash for the pigs in a bucket. Susu saw what she was doing. She ran home, took 10 sacks of barley flour and threw them all into the well. Susu was very proud of herself. She wanted to tell her husband how much mash she prepared for the animals. As soon as her husband came home, she immediately told him the story. "Do you know what I did today? Mash. The whole well is full of the stuff. There'll be plenty for the pigs." "What? Are you out of your mind, woman?" "That's exactly what I did." So Susu was beaten once more, and her husband told her that if she did this again, he would teach her a lesson she would never forget. On the third day, the neighbour woman was cooking cabbage with bacon. Susu watched her, then went home, sliced up a whole block of bacon, then she took the bits and pieces to the garden and placed them on the cabbage heads. At noon, her husband came home and saw his dog lying dead by the gate. He asked his wife, "What have you done to this dog, woman? Why did it drop dead?" "The thief ate all the bacon I was preparing for lunch in the garden. That killed him." The man looked into the pantry. The bacon was all gone. He realised what Susu must have done, and he beat her soundly. The man kept all his money in a leather bag under the bed, but he never told his wife, lest she should spend it all. He told his wife that it was an ogre. He scared her by saying that if she did something stupid, the ogre would eat her. One day, a travelling potter came their way. Susu wanted to give him the ogre so she wouldn't have to be afraid any longer. But of course, she did not want to give it away for free. So she asked the potter how many pots he would offer in return. Somehow the potter guessed what must be inside the ogre, so he gave her all of his pots. Susu was very happy with the deal. When she was left on her own, she placed the pots on the poles of the fence. Finally, she wanted to arrange the smaller mugs as well, but there was not enough room. Then she found a long pole and started yelling, "All right, you pots, stand in line so there is room for the little ones too." But the pots just didn't want to stand in line, so Susu smashed the pots with her pole. When her husband came home, he immediately saw the fragments on the ground. He suspected that something was wrong, so he asked, "Where did you get these pots, Susu?" "Well, you see, I paid for them with that ogre of yours, so you could never scare me with it again." The man nearly had a fit, but he realised that his wife was mad. The next morning, he sent Susu off to do some reaping, so she couldn't cause any more trouble at home. Susu went out to the field with a sickle, and by 10 o'clock, she harvested 3 sheaves of wheat. She pulled them together and arranged them in a stack. She huddled up in the middle and fell fast asleep. Her husband waited for her at home in vain. "This Susu has suddenly become so hard-working. I'm going to go after her before the work makes her sick." He went out to the field, but however hard he looked, he just couldn't see Susu anywhere. Where could she be? He was about to go home when he finally noticed the 3 sheaves of wheat. He walked up closer and discovered Susu snoring beneath them. It's then that he realised he had to get rid of Susu once and for all. He ran home and brought back a pillow full of feathers and a small pot of honey. He poured the honey all over Susu and then he covered her with the feathers. Susu woke up. She looked at her hands and feet and said to herself, her hands are like Susu's, her feet are like Susu's, but this is not Susu. How could this be? She just couldn't decide whether she was really Susu or not. Finally, she decided she would ask her husband whether his wife was at home. If he said yes, she is home, then she could not be Susu. If he answered no, then she must be Susu without a doubt. When she got to their house, she called out loud, "Listen, John, is your wife at home?" "Of course she is. What's wrong with that?" That was how Susu finally decided that she was not Susu. She started thinking about who she might be, but she just couldn't find out the solution. So in the end, she completely lost her mind. Finally, she ran off, and nobody has ever seen her since. Hungarian Folk Tales. Tiny Tom and the Lily Princess. Once upon a time, far, far away, over the ocean and beyond, there lived a king, and with the king lived a queen. And they had a very tiny son. No matter how many doctors they took him to, he just wouldn't grow. Tiny he was, and tiny he remained. The king grieved much over this, the queen even more. So much so that she fell ill. On her deathbed, she lay and called for the king. She said to him, "All I ask of you is that when you bury me, have a lily planted on my grave and have it guarded day and night so that no one can steal it." She spoke, and straight away she died. The king was much in grief. "If only my son were big, who can I leave my kingdom to when I am dead?" He buried his queen in pomp, wept over her, and mourned her. And he sent a proclamation across the kingdom calling for everyone who had a lily to bring it to the court so that one could be chosen for the queen's grave. They brought lilies by the cartload, but they couldn't agree which one was the finest of all. The king could hear all this uproar and went down into the courtyard. "What's all this quarrelling about?" One of the gardeners replied. "There are so many lilies here that we can hardly move, but we can't decide which one is the finest of all." "Where are you, Tiny Tom, my son? Come here and do something useful for a change. Close your eyes and pick a lily." So Tiny Tom closed his eyes and groped around like a blind man. And do you know what? The lily he picked was beautiful, and every bloom on it sparkled like a diamond. The king asked, "Who brought us this lily?" "Your Majesty, I brought it from Fairy Helen's garden." "Well then, you plant it and keep guard over it so that no one can steal it." "If you please, Your Majesty, may I ask that you send Tiny Tom with me? So if I should doze off, he'll be awake and alert." "Very well then," said the king. And so it happened. The old woman planted the flower and guarded it as if it were her life itself. So there they were, keeping guard until the old woman said, "Tiny Tom, I'm going to lie down for a while and I'll drop off to sleep. You stay guard over the lily so that no one can take it." "No one can take it? You sleep well, old lady." And while Tiny Tom was keeping guard, out of nowhere appeared a little man. "Good evening, Tom. Do you know what kind of flower you're guarding here?" "Well, I know that it's a lily and it comes from Fairy Helen's garden." "You see, that lily is the princess from Dwarfland. Let me tell you. Helen once went to see the king in Dwarfland and took a great liking to the princess. So she begged the king to let her have his daughter for a week or two, and he did. Helen was envious of her beauty, and she treated the princess so badly that she wept and wept, and then she died. When she was buried, that lily grew out of her grave, and it spoke once. Take me to the grave where a mother cried as much as I did over her dwarf of a son. And when the old nurse heard this, she pulled up the lily and brought it here. But Fairy Helen's own nurse heard all of this and told Fairy Helen. Now Helen can never be at peace until the flower is stolen back from here. Come here and I'll see to your troubles. And at that the little dwarf of a man pulled his beard from between his legs and he disappeared as if he had never been there. Tom was thinking and thinking and tried to stay awake. Suddenly he heard a fluttering and rustling. 12 fairies appeared. They made a circle around Tom, dancing, thinking that they could make him dizzy and one of them could steal the lily from the grave. But Tom was sharp. He shook the old woman awake and said, "Get up, old lady, they've come for the lily." So the old woman jumped up and took out her old spindle and then, swish, swish, she went at them. "Be off with you from here," she said, and she beat and slapped the fairies until they flew off back to fairyland without the lily. There they told Fairy Helen that they had failed to bring the lily with them. Now she had a 7-legged horse and she mounted it and off she went. Now as Tiny Tom was keeping guard, he suddenly heard a voice. "Tom, I think they're going to take me away. Fairy Helen is coming." And out of the lily there came a tiny young woman, more beautiful and radiant than the golden sun itself. Tom, if only I had my butterfly carriage for us to fly away in." And at the very moment she said that, 6 butterflies came flying there, drawing a fine carriage. The dwarf princess asked, "Will you come with me, Tom?" "Of course I will. Never will I part from you." Up they went, up and up, into the bright blue sky. The princess turned and said, "Tom, look back and tell me what you see. Oh, it's Fairy Helen. Don't let her catch up with us." Up and up they flew as fast could be. Suddenly a huge sheet of flame came licking at Tom's back. "Tom, look back and tell me what you see now. Oh, it's Fairy Helen. Her horse's breath is aflame and I can feel its heat. Just let us get up between the sun and the stars and the moon, for up there she has no powers." Now when they reached Dwarfland, the joy was great indeed. So pleased was the king to see his long-lost daughter that he swept her into his arms and covered her in kisses. He did the same with Tom. He said straight away that he would give his daughter's hand to Tom and make him king of the land. Then came the great wedding feast. There was no end to the dwarfs there, each one more handsome than the next, and everybody lived happily ever after.